Um, Thank you. Glad we could be together for this subject. Esoteric Judaism, class in the Illuminist History series. And I'd like to begin by clarifying the scope of this talk. You know, it would be possible for someone to speak of esoteric Judaism from the perspective of a practicing esoteric Jew. That's not who I am, and it's not what I'm trying to do. Instead, my intention here is to discuss elements of esoteric Judaism that inform the Illuminist tradition, by which I mean Pythagoreanism, Platonism, Hermeticism, and its descendants. To some extent, those traditions inform esoteric Judaism, but the point of this class is that esoteric Judaism comes to inform those traditions. That's my emphasis. I wanted to make that clear from the beginning. I find the historical development of Judaism from its origins in what we might call Palestinian paganism to be enormously fascinating, but in detail, that's not really relevant to our theme. I did want to touch, though, on the nature of monotheism itself. As a side effect of most of our having grown up in a culture with Christian roots, the contradiction between monotheism and polytheism has been overemphasized. Although saying this may get me in trouble with some contemporary polytheists, most traditional polytheist spiritualities acknowledge some kind of underlying unity. And all monotheistic and monist spiritualities acknowledge some multiplicity. So the disagreements aren't really about the facts on the ground, so much as what the proper attitude is to unity versus multiplicity in the various views of enlightenment and/or righteousness. The ancient Greco-Roman Neoplatonists, for example, recognized the one and even emphasized its importance, but generally held it was too transcendent and generalized to interact with in a regular way. If you're going to pray to something, better it be one God out of many, otherwise what's the point? For quite a while in their history, the early Jews worshipped one God not because he was the only one, but because he was the traditional one of their tribe, the one they'd made a deal with. Along with that came the sense that if you were a member of that tribe and you weren't true to that God, you were going to face dire consequences. If too many of the tribe were untrue, the whole tribe would face consequences. It's probably after the Alexandrian conquest of Palestine that the Jewish encounter with Greek philosophy led to the radical stance that the God of the Jewish people was the one true source of everything, after which the scriptures were altered to make it seem as if that's what they believed all along. As far as multiplicity, those who were subsidiary gods came to be viewed as angels and eventually demons. But this shift in theology has a profound impact on the spiritual life, not all of it negative. In our ordinary experience, multiplicity is characteristic of our outer world, all the objects of the senses, all the other beings to relate to. Unity, or singularity, is characteristic of our inner world. As mysterious as the sense of our own identity is, there is an undeniable sense that our thoughts, feelings, sensations, and memories all belong to a singular me. The radical leap of monotheism is to see the realm of the divine as something more closely resembling our inner world than our outer world. Our singular self beholds the singular divine in a one-to-one relationship. From this, the multiplicity of the outer world seems to be a dependency or emanation. Although the monotheism of the Abrahamic traditions is infamously patriarchal, from the standpoint of psychological development, the bond between monotheistic worshipper and the divine resembles nothing so much as the bond between infant and mother, or mother figure. we emerge as individuals from the mystery and gaze back at our origin, be it God or Mom, the primordial holding environment. This is our entry into the Judaic story. As the formation of the personality is rooted in the experience of the loss of the holding environment in early childhood, so our cultural sense of separation and the drive for reunion is rooted in the loss of and separation from the Temple of Jerusalem as depicted in the book of Ezekiel. This depicts the kavod, or glory of God, and kavod is related to the kavarna of the Persians as a flaming chariot. The kavarna, you may or may not recognize, was the glow that the Zoroastrians and other branches of Persian spirituality saw as characteristic of the true king. They would have a light, the light of righteousness, which came to be translated as kavod, or what we would call glory, and has a lot to do with the later depiction of the halo in Christian art. So this is the passage of Ezekiel of the flaming chariot. It's very familiar, but because it's so foundational, I thought it would be good to share here. As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud with brightness around it and fire flashing forth continually, and in the middle of the fire, something like gleaming amber. In the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They were of human form. Each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each of them moved straight ahead, without turning as they moved. As for the appearance of their faces, the 4 had the face of the human being, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their body. Each moved straight ahead. Wherever the spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. In the middle of the living creatures, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and from among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and lightning issued from the fire. The living creatures darted to and fro, like a flash of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the 4 of them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl, and the 4 had the same form, their construction being something like a wheel within a wheel. When they moved in any of the 4 directions without veering as they moved. Their rims were tall and awesome, for the rims of all 4 were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures moved, the wheels moved beside them. And when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the spirit would go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When they moved, the others moved. When they stopped, the others stopped. And when they rose from the earth, the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Over the heads of the living creatures there was something like a dome, shining like crystal, spread out above their heads. Under the dome their wings were stretched out straight, one toward another, and each of the creatures had 2 wings covering its body. When they moved, I heard the sound of their wings like the sound of mighty waters, like the thunder of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like the sound of an army. When they stopped, they let down their wings. And there came a voice from above the dome over their heads. When they stopped, they let down their wings. And above the dome, over their heads, there was something like a throne, in appearance like sapphire. And seated above the likeness of the throne was something that seemed like a human form. Upward from what appeared like the loins, I saw something like gleaming amber, something that looked like fire enclosed all around. and downward from what looked like the loins I saw something that looked like fire, and there was a splendor all around. Like the bow in a cloud on a rainy day, such was the appearance of the splendor all around. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And so this vision is the vision of the chariot of God, it's called, or in Hebrew, the Merkabah. It's also the throne of God, and very often throne and chariot in Jewish mysticism are interchangeable. The throne is mobile, it's a chariot, and the chariot is the seat of God. It's a throne. In Ezekiel, this is the divine presence departing the temple due to the idolatry of the Israelites. Following this is the destruction of the temple, the first temple, the Temple of Solomon, and the devastation of the nations. And after this, finally, is the restoration of the temple, depicted in profound detail in the last 8 chapters of the book of Ezekiel through an angelic vision. And we see a reconstruction of the temple as directed by the angelic vision in the slide. This vision of the restoration of the temple forms the structure of the spiritual quest, not only for Judaism, but for Christianity and Western civilization as a whole. It's a visionary complex given the name Imago Templi, the image of the temple, by the French visionary philosopher Henry Corbin. And we might recall that there's a kind of Imago Templi in the description of the fallen Egypt from the Asclepius in our previous class in Hermeticism, in all probability influenced by the Imago Templi in Ezekiel. After the return of the Israelites from the Babylonian captivity, the temple was rebuilt, this time known as the Second Temple. The religious authority at that time was maintained by the Zadokite priesthood, who claimed their authority through Aaron, the brother of Moses. And so the Zadokite literature was centered around the books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament or Torah. This built up the authority of the Zadokite priesthood, and notably defined the origin of evil as the responsibility of humanity through the story of the Garden of Eden. You know, Adam, Eve, serpent, that whole story. But there was a dissenting party that grew up simultaneously and in opposition to the Zadokite priesthood. They viewed the Second Temple and its priesthood as a false claim to the authentic restoration of divine authority. They had a separate scriptural tradition, based not on Moses, but on the far earlier prophet Enoch, who lived before the flood. Notably, they viewed evil as having originated due not to the errors of humanity, but because of an abominable and catastrophic breeding between angels and human women. This is known as Enochic Judaism, and is the root of the esoteric Judaic tradition. The earliest literature we have from their tradition is a collection of works collected under the title of the First Book of Enoch. The earliest section, chapters 6 through 36, is known as the Book of the Watchers, and tells the tale of a group of angels, angels from a category known as Watchers, and in Greek that's egregoros, the source of the occult term egregor, who bind themselves with an oath to descend to earth and lie with human women. While they are there, they teach humans many crafts, particularly the making of advanced weapons. Their union with women results in the birth of 500-foot-high giants who consume all the food in the land and then rampage when people refuse to feed them. The renegade angels thus create unlimited carnage. God then plans to destroy all flesh upon the earth with a flood and tells the fallen angels of his wrath and that they will be punished. Before the flood, however, Enoch is granted a vision in which he beholds many mysteries, including the fear of the rebellious angels and what God has in store for them. he is also shown great stores of knowledge from the divine perspective, particularly about the stars and their movements. The next earliest section is called the Astronomical Book. It's chapters 72 through 82 of the first book of Enoch, of 1 Enoch as it's called, which revisits the knowledge of the heavenly bodies bestowed to Enoch. Unfortunately, it provides details showing that the authors had very little knowledge of astronomy compared to the Babylonians. The calculations just, they are only have a vague relationship to reality, and in most respects are simply wrong. But the passage of greatest interest is chapter 81, in which Enoch gets to read the tablets of heaven and learn the doings of humanity through all time. He is then told to bestow this knowledge on his son Methuselah, which seems to set the stage for the esoteric wisdom handed down through the Enochic priesthood, Methuselah to Lamech, Lamech to Noah, and so on. This association of Enoch with the primordial books of heaven strongly recalls the Egyptian Thoth, and perhaps there is some prehistoric connection between them and also possibly the Sumerian god Enki, associated with the word, translation, and protection from the Great Flood. Later Arabs identified Idris, which is the Arabic name for Enoch, with Hermes Trismegistus and Thoth. The other sections aren't essential from an esoteric perspective, although I have to mention the retelling of the story of the breeding of angels and women, indeed the history of humankind up through the Maccabean revolt, only this time using livestock, farm animals. Stars come down to mix with cows, who then breed elephants, camels, and donkeys, and so on. This is known as the Animal Apocalypse, chapters 85 through 90, and it should be remembered for the title alone at the very least. But what's the point behind the story of the breeding of angels and human women? Some historians suggest that this was a way for the Jews of the time to account for the strange disruptive force of foreign occupying powers, such as the Persians and the Greeks. The occupiers' weapons could be seen as the fruits of evil interference in God's plan. Their alien gods might not have been gods at all, but monstrous giants who walked the earth and performed abominations. But another explanation might have been that this was originally an inner teaching meant to create a sense of urgency for the cultivation of mindfulness. If taking the path of least resistance in this life leads to sinfulness because of the sin of higher forces beyond our control, it requires us to make extraordinary efforts to rectify the situation, or at least avoid becoming accessories to those sins. As an inner teaching, transmitted perhaps after prolonged practice in developing concentration, it would have made sense. As a generally available story, it runs the risk of leading people to live their lives in fear of external demons, perpetuating a sense of separation and paranoia, as indeed we've seen ever since. After the Maccabean revolt, during which Jewish culture turned sharply away from Hellenistic influences, there was competition between the Zadokite and Enochic branches of Judaism. The Zadokite priesthood argued that what needed to be restored was the traditional Second Temple authority, purged of Hellenistic impurities. The Enochic party put forth that the Zadokite priesthood and the Second Temple had always been impure, that it required the authority and wisdom of the Enochic priesthood derived from knowledge derived directly from heaven by the prophet Enoch to set matters right again. This Enochic party is what later became known as the Essenes. As it happens, the Zadokites prevailed. The Essenes incorporated some of the Mosaic law and scriptures, interpreting the Mosaic laws and scriptures in their own manner, and settled into being a minority sect within the larger Jewish community. But one current within the Essenes turned separatist, developed an exclusive teaching that required rejection of the temple in Jerusalem, and started a schismatic branch of Judaism in the place now known as Qumran. This is the community that left us the Dead Sea Scrolls. They are entirely within the tradition of Enochic Judaism, but with an added sectarian bent. They were a sect within the larger Essene movement, while at the same time, the less separatist Essenes lived side by side with the mainstream Jews of the time in Jerusalem and elsewhere. What is particularly of interest in the Qumran community is not so much the literature of the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, as the way they embodied the restoration of the temple through purification, ceremony, and visionary affirmation. This was not a temple of stone, it was a temple of the imagination, the imago templi as the organizing force of a small society, and it provided a template for the Christianity that was soon to come, and in general, for a drive to realize the end of separateness through intention that we will see reappear age after age. Beyond the enclosures of Qumran, Enochic Judaism continued to develop. It is difficult to date the second book of Enoch, but it was possibly written before the destruction of the Second Temple in 79 AD. It tells the story of Enoch being guided through the first 7 heavens by angels, then brought beyond the 7th heaven by Gabriel himself, at which point he is able to behold God directly, though at a distance in the 10th heaven. This ascent through the heavens forms the template for what will later become Merkabah mysticism. Enoch is anointed by Michael, at which point he comes to resemble the angels, and an angel dictates 360 books to him, containing all that is knowable. God himself tells him the secrets not known even to the angels of the time from the beginning of the creation up to the flood. Enoch is then given 30 days to return to earth and instruct his sons, and then is brought back to heaven forever. Towards the end of the second book of Enoch, the origin story of Melchizedek is told. You might know him as the mysterious figure who appears out of nowhere to anoint Abraham in Genesis, thereby establishing the priestly credentials of the Jewish people at the very beginning. It turns out that Melchizedek was born by an immaculate conception from the wife of Noah's brother Ner, already formed like a 3-year-old child, clothed and able to perform blessings right out of the womb. 40 days later, he is brought to the Garden of Eden, which is the 3rd of the 7 heavens, to evade the ravages of the flood. The presence of the Garden of Eden in this story demonstrates that by this time, the Enochic tradition has fully assimilated the Zadokite account of the origins of evil, although the presence of the Grigori, which are the egregores, in the 5th heaven shows the lingering presence of the original Enochic account. After the flood, Melchizedek is returned to earth to establish his priestly line, essentially the Enochic initiated tradition. The 3rd book of Enoch exemplifies Merkabah mysticism itself, also called the Hekalot tradition. Hekalot, palaces, Merkabah, chariot. In these texts, one is brought through the 7 palaces, Hekalot, all the way up to the chariot, or Merkabah, in other words, the throne of God. The 3rd book of Enoch is a later work from within the Merkabah tradition, possibly from the 4th or 5th century AD, but it is especially poetic and evocative. If you didn't get around to it from the readings, if you read nothing else, just for aesthetic value at all, I recommend it. It tells in detail of how Enoch was transformed into the archangel Metatron and receives all of the secrets of creation. It is therefore very much in keeping with the earlier stories of Enoch, but now in the context of a body of theurgic practice, and thus can be viewed as a literary depiction of the highest enlightenment. While 3 Enoch tells the story of the ascent, other Merkabah texts provide instruction for how the practitioner or theurgist can accomplish this ascent for him or herself. We can see how Enochic Judaism gradually transformed from a sect of its own to a tradition of contemplative and even magical practice within Rabbinic Judaism. Stepping back for a moment from the Enochic thread, we should make note, for Illuminist purposes, of the Hellenistic Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, who lived from around 20 BC to 50 AD. His writings forge a link between the Jewish religion of the time and Platonic philosophy, explaining the commonality between the tenets of his people and the Greek culture in which they increasingly found themselves. His work links the ideas of the celestial Adam and the Platonic form of humanity as the anthropos, and this way probably informing the image of the cosmic man in the Corpus Hermeticum, and certainly that of the Kabbalistic Adam Kadmon that we'll discuss in a little bit. Hellenistic Judaism is also the milieu from which one of the most mysterious texts of all Jewish esotericism emerged, the Sepher Yetzirah, or Book of Formation. It is extremely concise, profoundly influential in Judaism and occultism alike, and it's just like nothing else. It is as if it came out of nowhere. It's possibly dated from the 4th century AD, although no one knows for sure. It seems to be a kind of Pythagorean Jewish hybrid. It starts with a description of the first 10 numbers, like the Pythagorean tetractys. Then it provides correspondences for the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, dividing them up into the 3 letters of the elements, air, water, and fire, 7 planetary letters, and 12 zodiacal letters. In this way, identifying the alphabet as a set of Neoplatonic synthema or symbola. All of them are arranged around the body in the form of a cube or octahedron, depending on how you envision it. One of the notable aspects of these correspondences is that they are orderly and complete, unlike the relatively ad hoc correspondences of the Pythagoreans, at least those that remain to us. This systematic approach to correspondences later becomes a signature of Western occultism. As out of blue as this text seems, it was accepted widely within the body of Judaism and has been ever since. Additionally, the text points out the 231 possible permutations of the pairs of the 22 Hebrew letters. I love this chart. You can see that the 22 letters around the outside, and then there's a line that goes between every letter and every other letter, making 231 lines altogether. Sacred math, I love it. In the Middle Ages, the systematic one-pointed chanting of these permutations, additionally combined with the 5 Hebrew vowel points, formed the recipe for creating a golem, which in the context of the text can be seen as the conscious recapitulation of the embodied self within creation by connecting to the symbolic representation of its underlying components. Another text of uncertain providence is the Testament of Solomon, counted among what are called the Old Testament pseudepigrapha, or falsely attributed writings. This tells the story of how Solomon magically completed the construction of the first temple with the help of demons, including lists of demons, some of whose names can be traced to Ptolemaic Egypt. It is a crucial text in the history of Solomonic magic. If the lesser key of Solomon is Elvis, the Testament of Solomon is Chuck Berry, or perhaps even Big Mama Thornton. Coming back to the Enochic thread, there's a genre of text I only recently discovered related to the Hekaloth tradition, exemplified by the Sar Torah, or Prince of the Torah. In this text, God, against the wishes of the angels, provides a ritual whereby one attains complete knowledge of the Torah without having to study, knowledge so profound that one obtains immeasurable powers. This brings us one step closer to the tradition of full-on Jewish magical grimoires, such as the Sepher, which allows the practitioner to petition angels for worldly goods and powers. And this gets into the general current of European grimoires, about which a lot of historical work has been done in recent years that I'm not up to date with. But I hope to invite a guest better versed than I am in such things when the time comes. Then there comes the subject that one would think would be the main course in a class on this theme, the Holy Kabbalah. And I approach this with some trepidation. When I talk about Enochic Judaism, I'm not worried about stepping on anyone's toes, outside of maybe a small number of people in Ethiopia I'm unlikely to ever meet. There are no more Enochic Jews. But there are current participants in a tradition that's been going on for centuries that involves devoting one's life to the story or to the study of Jewish scripture, Tanakh, Mishnah, Talmud, Midrash, living that over the years and decades, and only after that, maybe, just maybe, joining forces with other highly qualified individuals who have done the same with their lives to humbly begin the investigation into Kabbalah. I am not one of those people. And so from that point of view, I have no business even talking about it. On the other hand, I am trying to tell the story of the esoteric tradition rooted in the teachings of Pythagoras, Plato, and the later Platonists in all of the ways in which it unfolded. And there's no way of talking about what happens to that tradition after the dawning of the Renaissance without touching on the Kabbalah and its doctrine. Some of the dissemination of the Kabbalah into what would later become known as the Hermetic Revival happened as a free and open exchange between willing intellectuals and seekers across traditions. But too much of it is grounded in exploitation and what we would now call cultural appropriation to be entirely comfortable with it. I have no easy solution for this other than to call attention to it. Maybe even in sharing this story, we are to an extent participating in cultural appropriation, but at least we can keep our eyes open as we do. One of the first things to note about Kabbalah is that it is much less direct than Merkaba mysticism. No, I guess I skipped a slide. I missed putting a slide in. The sense seems to have been that man's station is far too humble to attain direct vision of the divine, and that even trying to do so is fraught with danger. Kabbalah is for the most part contemplative, although so-called practical Kabbalah, similar to what we've seen in the Sepher Ratziel, has always existed around the margins. Yet focused contemplation of the divine has its own kind of invocational power. But the contemplation of what? Here we see the beginning. In the center of this chart is the Ein, which is the nothing. And underlying everything else is the nothing. Perhaps it's divine, but it is so far beyond our contemplation, or so far beyond our imagination, that all we can see, all we can say is nothing. And from the Ayin emanates, according to Kabbalistic doctrine, from the Ayin emanates the Ein Sof, which means the without limit, the limitless. And from the Ein Sof emanates the Ein Sof R, or the limitless light. So I think some conceptual frameworks begin with the limitless light, but for Kabbalah, there are the two layers that are more rarefied beyond that, the limitless and the not. And it is only once we have the limitless light that emanates into the famous Kabbalistic tree of life. And the tree of life can be seen as a combination of, or in two primary ways. One of them is as a series of emanations from the Ein Sof R to the crown, or the first Sephiroth, which is the beginning contraction towards actually creating something, the head of God. By now, it's concrete enough that we can refer to the crown of God. And then going through the 9 remaining Sephiroth, stage by stage, all the way down to the center, the kingdom, the actual material creation, which is the universe as we know it. So in one sense, the tree of life is this series of emanations from the nothing all the way down to the world as we know it, the universe as we know it. And then there is also a way in which the Sephiroth resembles the anatomy of the body of God, or the body perhaps of the primordial human, the human prototype, Adam Kadmon. And so there's a way in which this arrangement of Sephiroth resembles the human body, a head at the top, feet at the bottom, arms and shoulders and arms and legs, a heart and loins. And so that's at the root, more commonly interpreted to be at the root of this particular arrangement of Sephiroth. And ordinarily, when we talk about the Kabbalah, you have classes spent on analyzing every one of these spheres, all of the paths. This is not what you'd usually see as an arrangement of the paths from a Hermetic or Christian Kabbalistic perspective, but it's often seen this way in Jewish Kabbalah. And I don't know to what extent we want to get into breaking down every last detail of it here. That's not necessarily our emphasis. I'll mention a few things. That the tree is arranged in three vertical pillars. In the center is the pillar of beauty. On the right, as we view it, is the pillar of mercy. And on the left is the pillar of severity. And these come from the names, or some of the names of the spheres in the middle triangle. Chesed is glory, but it is also mercy. Geburah is strength, but it is also severity. And Tifereth is harmony, but it is also beauty. The top three Sephiroth are considered to be the supernal, or the most exalted dimensions of creation, and there are special attributes only for them. One thing that is notable as a difference between Jewish Kabbalah and Christian or Hermetic Kabbalah is that the genders of Chokmah and Binah, the second and third spheres, are generally reversed. Kether is air, that is neutral, as in Christian Kabbalah, but Chokmah is feminine and is water. Binah is fire and masculine. And this makes sense when you think about Chokmah is Hebrew for wisdom, and wisdom is in Greek Sophia, so thought of as a feminine figure, and comes before, in this scheme, the third Sephiroth of understanding, which is male. So it has a kind of female first orientation in the depiction of the Sephiroth. And so that's when I discovered that, having come from a Hermetic Christian Kabbalistic background, it was a big mind blower. And I don't know if there's a lot more of detail that I want to get into at this moment, but I would ask that maybe some of you who are on the call have a background in Kabbalah and have things that you want to say or share or ask about the Tree of Life itself before we move on. Anybody? Maybe not. Okay, well, I'm just going to go on. So this, in Hebrew, is the fourfold name of God. We usually say Jehovah or Yehovah. It's the Hebrew letters Yod, He, Vav, He, and it's the most sacred name of God. In Hellenistic Judaism, they would just use the term tetragrammaton, the four-lettered word. And in Greek also, they would transcribe it, and you see this in Hellenistic Jewish scriptures. You even find there are parts of the Dead Sea Scrolls that have this name, IAO, Iota Alpha Omicron, or sometimes Iota Alpha Omega, Iao, as a way of transcribing Yod He Vav He, which becomes a big deal in Gnosticism and later Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, and so forth. But this is one of the most fundamental breakdowns in Kabbalah, you break everything down into the 4 aspects of the divine name of God. Oh, and Jehovah, by the way, we say that, or Yehovah, is not the actual pronunciation of this name, but because it is not to be pronounced, they would say Yehovah by substituting the vowels of another name of God, Elohim, and when you combine those vowels into these letters, you would get Yehovah. And that itself is safe to say. Here's another breakdown of the tree of life to illustrate the doctrine of the 4 worlds, which is the 4 letters of the divine name applied to the structure of the cosmos as a whole. Starting with the tree on the right, where the spheres are arranged more or less in the familiar, in the way that's familiar to us. The top 3 spheres are the world of Atziluth. That is the transcendent world of pure being, the world that is free of even a trace of form. The second world of the second triad of spheres is the world of Bria, which is akin to the Platonic world of forms. It is where the seeds of creation, of God's ideas are, before they are actually made into any kind of formal creation. The third level, the world of Yetzirah, is called the world of formation. And so things are not solid yet, but you have differentiation. This is where forms interact and begin to make the images that are the building blocks of the universe as we know it. And the universe as we know it is the 4th world, the world of Asaya. And as you'd expect, breaking this down into Yod, He, Vav, He, the first letter of the divine name Yod corresponds to the world of Atziluth. The second letter He corresponds to Bria. The third letter Vav corresponds to Yetzirah. And the final He corresponds to the world of Asaya. The tree of life that you see on the left is the less common but possibly older formation, where you have no descent into the world of Asaya. There's no sphere of the kingdom. Instead, there is a sphere of knowledge that is between the crown and the heart of beauty, that is in Hebrew called Da'ath, that is the undefiled knowledge before the fall. And then once you have the fall of man, that knowledge becomes dualistic and it's no longer a true sphere. And in its place, you have the world of Asaya, the 10th sphere of Malkuth. But you can also see by this tree of life on the left that it may be an old form. I've heard someone say that really the shape of the tree of life is a Persian perspective of a double cube. And if you look at it, you can kind of see how that could have at one time been a depiction of one cube stacked on top of another, and the spheres are the corners. I do not know, in fact, where that person's source was for it, but you could see how that could be. And it has a kind of archetypal resonance for me anyway. Then there's the doctrine of the Shekinah. This is not exclusively Kabbalistic, but it is very important in Kabbalah. And the concept of the Shekinah evolves a great deal over the history of Judaism. At the beginning, the Shekinah is the presence of God, not really distinct from God, but God is this transcendent being, so the extent to which you can feel the presence of God is the Shekinah. For instance, there's the passage from Exodus chapter 14, verses 19 to 21. The angel of God who had been going before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was a cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the other all day. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept back the sea by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. Very famous passage from Exodus. But the point is that pillar of cloud was regarded as the Shekinah, the presence of God that accompanied the people of Israel through their exodus from Egypt to the Promised Land. Then later, the Shekinah came to mean more or less the same as the kavod, or glory of God, that was represented by the chariot, the Merkava. And then came the wisdom literature, where in Second Temple Jewish literature, a series of books came out. Proverbs is part of it, and you see it in others, where wisdom is depicted as female. Roots possibly also in the Song of Solomon. And this idea of wisdom as feminine gets to be more and more emphasized until by the Middle Ages, you have a devotion to the presence of God as the female Shekinah, as practically feminine focus of worship in herself, probably very influenced by the cult of Mary that in the Christian communities that the Jews lived side by side in was coming to greater emphasis. And as the cult of Mary became emphasized among the Christians, the cult of the Shekinah became emphasized among the Jews. And then in Kabbalistic tradition, mysticism and contemplation of the Shekinah as the presence of God and also of a feminine embodiment of divine power came to play a significant role. Now, about that quote that I had made from Exodus, those are 3 verses that in Hebrew each have 72 letters. 72 letters in 3 consecutive verses. There's not much like it elsewhere in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible. And this became for in the Sepher Ratzial that we already spoke with, and then later Kabbalists, known as the 72-fold name of God, or Shem Hemferhash. The way it worked is they took the letters of the first verse moving forward, and they paired them with the letters of the second verse moving backwards, and then ended them with the letters of the third verse moving forward again, so that you had a set of 72 3-lettered names, and then they added either El or Yah to them to make a set of 72 angels. And these 72 angels were considered to be the power of the divine written out in detail. So a forbidden name, secret knowledge for the Kabbalists and for Jewish magicians, and eventually to be attributed to the zodiac. So if you have the 360 degrees of the zodiac, each angel occupied 5 degrees of the night sky. So it became associated, or those angels became associated with star magic. So an important piece of Jewish mysticism there. This chart in the slide actually comes from the Renaissance, so it's getting a little ahead of ourselves, but it does depict the 72 angels and some of their attributions, if you could look at the teeny tiny letters. Then there's the doctrine of Adam Kadmon. We've mentioned already the primordial human, but the mysticism of Adam Kadmon, of being able to resonate between one's own form as a human being and the primordial human, and trying to restore in one's own soul the state of Adam Kadmon before the fall, became a kind of mysticism of its own, and is worked out in enormous detail in various parts of Kabbalistic literature. And of course, the doctrine of the Messiah, which is consistent through all kinds of Judaism, but is particularly contemplated in a Kabbalistic doctrine, where the Messiah is the anointed one, so that had the sense of the anointed king, and is connected also with the glory, the kavarna of the Persians, that how do you know that someone has that divine mandate, but by the light that emanates from them, that anointing from the divine source of authority. And it's, among other things, I think, a way of talking about that pristine, enlightened condition that in Judaism they wait for the Messiah, and that's a state of waiting for the state of enlightenment to come, and that by sending up the prayers forming an upward triangle to correspond reciprocally with the downward descending divine action of creation, the downward triangle, to achieve the synchronization of the prayer and the embodiment, forms the Star of David, the Mogan David, the Shield of David, that is, of course, the symbol of Judaism, but also indicates the arrival of the Messiah within the consciousness of the adept. The last manifestation of an esoteric Judaism to appear before our Renaissance cutoff date is the Book of Abramelin. And this was a kind of grimoire written down by a German Jew who may or may not have been the Rabbi Jacob Merlin, known as the Maharil, around 1400. But the author claims that the source of the magic was a Jewish magician living in southern Egypt. And this book is a magical retreat intended to grant the practitioner knowledge and conversation of their holy guardian angel. While the better-known French manuscript says that this work is done over a 6-month period, the earlier German source that we have published in English in 2006 allots 18 months for the operation. And here we can see a direct connection between Abramelin's holy guardian angel and what we've studied earlier as the Platonic and Neoplatonic daimon. And there are also similarities between this kind of operation and parts of the Greek magical papyri that make the purported Egyptian origins of Abramelin's magic particularly compelling, if unprovable. And with that, we'll leave off with the story of esoteric Judaism for now. We'll return to further developments such as Lurianic Kabbalah and the Sabbateans when we study the esoteric explosion that is the Renaissance. But there are many parts of the story that need to be accounted for between now and then in the classes to come.